My family threw a party the day after my miscarriage. Now they wonder why I missed my sister's wedding. I was 8 weeks pregnant when I lost the baby. My husband Kyle and I had been trying for 2 years, went through 3 rounds of fertility treatments, and finally got that positive test. We told my family at 6 weeks because my mom kept asking why I looked so tired at Sunday dinners. My sister Bethany immediately made it about her, saying we were stealing attention from her engagement. She'd gotten engaged 3 months earlier and her wedding was still 10 months away. My mom said we should have waited until after Bethy's wedding to even try getting pregnant, but they still acted happy enough. My dad even bought a onesie that said Grandpa's fishing buddy and left it on our doorstep. Everything seemed fine until that Thursday when I started bleeding at work. Kyle rushed me to the hospital, but there was nothing they could do. The baby was gone. I called my mom from the hospital bed crying so hard I could barely get the words out. She said that was really sad and asked if I'd still be able to make it to Bethy's wedding shower that weekend. I said, "What shower?" Nobody told me about any shower. She said they just planned it and wanted to surprise me. I told her I just lost my baby and she said, "I know, honey, but life goes on." Kyle took Friday off to stay home with me. I couldn't stop crying, couldn't eat, could barely get out of bed. My mom called twice, both times to ask about the shower, not once to ask how I was doing. I told her I wasn't coming and turned off my phone. Saturday morning, Kyle went to get groceries and my pain medication from the pharmacy. While he was gone, I heard cars pulling up outside. Lots of cars. Then music started playing from my parents' house next door. We lived in the house my grandmother left me when she died, right next to my parents' place. The music got louder and I could hear people laughing, shouting congratulations. I looked out the window and saw pink and white balloons, a huge bride-to-be banner, and at least 30 people in my parents' backyard. The wedding shower was happening literally 20 feet from my bedroom window. I texted my mom asking her to turn down the music because I was trying to rest. She texted back that I was being selfish and Bethany deserved her special day. She said I should come over and support my sister instead of sulking. I didn't respond. The party went on for 6 hours. At one point, Bethany herself came to my front door with 2 of her bridesmaids. She knocked until I answered, standing there in my pajamas, eyes swollen from crying. She handed me a piece of cake and said, "Mom wanted to make sure I ate something." Then she said, since I was too busy to come celebrate with her, the least I could do was not ruin the mood with my negativity. She actually used the word negativity about my miscarriage. That happened 2 days ago. Her bridesmaids just stood there nodding. I shut the door in her face. Kyle came home to find me sobbing on the bathroom floor. When he saw the party still going on next door, he went over there and told them exactly what he thought of them. My dad actually said I needed to learn that other people's lives don't stop just because something bad happened to me. Kyle told them we were done with them and came back home. That night, my mom left 17 voicemails saying I was dividing the family and Bethany was crying on her special day. For the next 8 months, I didn't speak to any of them. They'd text, call, show up at my door, but I never answered. My mom would leave casseroles on my porch with notes saying she was just trying to help. Bethany sent me bridesmaid dress options through email, even though I'd never agreed to be in her wedding. My dad left a letter saying I was breaking my mother's heart by being stubborn. 3 weeks before the wedding, Bethany came to my work with my mom. They cornered me in the parking lot. Bethany said I needed to get over myself and be her maid of honor like we'd always planned. I'd never agreed to that either. My mom said the miscarriage was months ago and holding grudges wasn't healthy. She actually said maybe it was meant to be because now I could focus on Bethy's wedding without distraction. I told them I wasn't coming to the wedding at all. Bethany started screaming that I was jealous and bitter and trying to ruin her life. My mom said if I didn't come, I'd regret it forever. I said the only thing I regretted was telling them about my pregnancy in the first place. The day of Bethy's wedding, Kyle and I were on a plane to Hawaii. We'd used the money we'd saved for baby stuff to take a vacation somewhere we could actually heal without my family making everything worse. Bethany called me 47 times during her reception. I didn't answer most of the calls because I was too busy standing on a beach in Maui watching the sunset with Kyle, finally breathing without feeling like someone was sitting on my chest. We came home to find our front porch looking like a wedding graveyard. Wilted pink roses sat in cheap glass vases. The water turned murky and brown. White tulle bows drooped from our porch railing. Little bags of Jordan almonds were scattered across the welcome mat, some crushed underfoot traffic. A framed photo of Bethany and Wyatt cutting their cake leaned against our front door. On top of everything sat a card in my mother's handwriting that said, "You missed a beautiful day. Your sister looked radiant. Some moments can't be replaced." I picked up one of the centerpieces and the roses crumbled in my hand. Petals falling onto the porch like confetti. Kyle came up behind me with our suitcases and stopped dead. He set down the bags and pulled out his phone without saying anything, opening our security camera app. I started grabbing the vases and shoving them into a garbage bag while he scrolled through footage. The tulle went in next, then the almonds, then the stupid photo that I wanted to smash, but just threw in the bag instead. Kyle made a sound in his throat and turned his phone toward me. The footage showed my mother's face in night vision. Time stamped at 2:17 a.m. on the night of the wedding. She was carrying a vase of flowers up our front steps, placing it carefully next to the door. She went back to her house and returned with another vase at 2:23 a.m. Then the tulle at 2:31 a.m., then the photo frame at 2:44 a.m. Each trip, she took her time, arranging everything just so, stepping back to look at her work before going to get the next item. In one clip, she actually adjusted a bow she'd already placed, making sure it hung at the perfect angle. Kyle and I watched the whole thing without talking. 7 trips total, spread across 40 minutes in the middle of the night while her daughter's wedding reception was probably still being cleaned up. She'd left the party early or stayed up after everyone left just to do this to build this little shrine to her absence on our doorstep. The last clip showed her standing back and looking at the whole display, nodding to herself before walking back to her house. Kyle closed the app and we both just stood there looking at the real thing in front of us. I finished filling the garbage bag and tied it shut, hauling it to the curb, even though trash pickup wasn't until Thursday. Some of the vases clinked together and I heard glass break, but I didn't care. Monday morning, I went back to work and tried to act normal. I made it to my desk and was logging into my computer when Arabella came over with 2 coffees. She set one down in front of me and asked how Hawaii was. I told her it was good, really good, actually, and found myself smiling when I described the beach where we watched sea turtles and the hike we took to see the sunrise over the crater. She smiled back and said I looked different, lighter somehow. I said I felt different and meant it. Around 10, my boss, Jasper, sent me a message asking me to come to his office when I had a minute. My stomach dropped and I immediately thought my family had called my work or sent something here or complained about me to my boss. I walked to his office trying to figure out what I'd say, how I'd explain everything. He closed the door behind me and gestured to a chair. He said he wanted to check in with me because he'd heard I'd been dealing with a personal loss and wanted to make sure I had everything I needed. He asked if I wanted any schedule adjustments or time off or anything else that might help. I just stared at him because I'd never told him about the miscarriage. He said Arabella had mentioned months ago that I was going through something difficult and asked him to be understanding if I seemed off. She hadn't given him details, just asked him to give me space and support. I felt something in my chest crack open and had to blink back tears. I told him thank you and that I was doing better now, but I'd let him know if I needed anything. He said his door was always open and that clear's throat was it. I went back to my desk and Arabella looked up from her computer. I mouthed thank you to her and she just nodded and went back to typing like it was nothing, like she hadn't been quietly protecting me this whole time without me even knowing. That evening, I was making dinner when I heard a car door slam outside. I looked through the kitchen window and saw my father walking up our driveway carrying a casserole dish and a manila envelope. Kyle was faster than me, already at the front door before my father could knock. I heard Kyle's voice through the door saying we weren't ready to talk yet and we needed more time. My father said something I couldn't make out and then I heard the mail slot creak open. The envelope dropped onto our floor and my father's footsteps went back down the driveway. Kyle picked up the envelope and brought it to the kitchen table. Inside were printed screenshots of Facebook comments, at least 30 pages of them. I recognized names of aunts and uncles and cousins I hadn't seen in years. My Aunt Diane had written that I always was a jealous person, even as a child. My Uncle Rob said I needed to grow up and stop being bitter about my sister's happiness. A second cousin I'd met maybe twice said I was toxic and Bethany was better off without me in her wedding. My mom's best friend from church said it was sad when family members couldn't put aside their own problems for one special day. Comment after comment, all talking about what a terrible person I was for missing my sister's wedding. How selfish and immature and cruel. I flipped through the pages and not one single comment mentioned a miscarriage. Not one person seemed to know I'd lost a baby. My mother had told everyone a story about me being jealous of Bethy's engagement and causing drama to steal attention. She'd made me the villain and left out every detail that would explain why I wasn't there. Kyle was already opening Facebook on his phone, his jaw tight. He said we needed to tell everyone the truth and set the record straight about what really happened. I put my hand over his phone screen and told him to wait. I said if we responded to every comment and tried to explain ourselves to all these people, we'd be doing exactly what my mother wanted. She'd set a trap and we'd be walking right into it, spending our energy defending ourselves and getting dragged into arguments with people who already decided we were wrong. Kyle asked what we should do then, and I said I needed to think about it. I took the envelope to our bedroom and sat on the bed reading through all the comments again. These people didn't know me. Half of them hadn't talked to me since I was a kid. They were forming opinions based on my mother's lies, and I realized I didn't owe them explanations or defenses or anything at all. But I also realized there were probably people who deserved to know the truth, people who might actually care if they knew what had really happened. I opened Facebook on my laptop and started typing. I wrote that I'd experienced a pregnancy loss at 8 weeks after years of trying to conceive. I wrote that the day after I lost my baby, my family held a party 20 feet from my bedroom window. I wrote that I was focusing on healing and moving forward with people who supported me. I didn't mention the wedding. I didn't mention Bethy's name. I didn't mention my mother or the shower or any of the specific details that would turn it into a fight. I just stated what happened to me and what I needed now. I read it over 3 times, deleted a few sentences that sounded too angry, and posted it before I could change my mind. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing non-stop with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. My cousin Rachel sent 3 paragraphs apologizing for what she'd written on Facebook, saying she had no idea about the miscarriage. Uncle Rob texted that he felt terrible and wished he'd asked questions before jumping to conclusions. My mom's cousin sent a message saying she was shocked that nobody told her what really happened and that she would have supported me if she'd known. More messages kept coming in, one after another, each person expressing surprise that my mother never mentioned I'd lost a baby. Some of them seemed genuinely upset that they'd been kept in the dark. Others just seemed embarrassed that they'd said harsh things without knowing the full story. I sat on the couch scrolling through all the apologies and explanations while Kyle made dinner in the kitchen. He kept glancing over at me, checking to see if I was okay, and I honestly didn't know how I felt about any of it. My phone rang and I saw it was my Aunt Diane, my dad's sister, who I'd always been close to growing up. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was crying before I even said hello. She told me she was so sorry for believing my mother's version without questioning it, that she felt awful for the comment she'd left on Facebook, calling me jealous. I asked her what exactly my mother had told everyone, and she said the story was that I'd been acting weird and distant ever since Bethany got engaged, that I'd made up some drama to steal attention from the wedding planning, that I was bitter about being the older sister who wasn't married first, even though I was already married to Kyle. My aunt said my mother painted the whole thing as me being unable to handle Bethy's happiness and using any excuse to make everything about myself. There was no mention of a pregnancy or a miscarriage or a hospital or any of it, just that I was causing problems because I couldn't stand seeing Bethany get attention. I thanked my aunt for calling and told her I appreciated the apology. She asked if I was doing okay now and I said I was working on it. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important and then hung up. Kyle brought me a plate of pasta and sat next to me on the couch. I told him what my aunt had said about my mother's story, and he shook his head but didn't look surprised. He said my mother had been controlling the story this whole time and that's why she was so mad about my Facebook post. I'd taken away her ability to be the one telling everyone what happened. My phone buzzed again and this time it was a text from Bethany. I stared at her name on my screen for a few seconds before opening it. The message started with her saying the Hawaii pictures I'd posted looked really nice and she hoped I'd had a good time. Then it shifted into her saying she couldn't believe I was trying to make her wedding about me even after it was over. That I deliberately posted something to make people think badly of her on what should have been the happiest time of her life. That I was so focused on ruining her marriage before it even started that I couldn't just be happy for her. The whole text went on like that for several paragraphs, accusing me of being jealous and bitter and trying to destroy her happiness. Not once did she mention the miscarriage. Not once did she ask how I was doing or acknowledge that I'd lost a baby. It was all about how I'd wronged her and damaged her special day. I showed the text to Kyle and he read it twice before handing my phone back. He asked if I was going to respond and I said no. There was nothing I could say that would make Bethany understand and I was tired of trying to explain myself to people who didn't want to hear it. Kyle said that was probably smart and went back to the kitchen to get himself some food. My phone rang again and this time it was my dad's number. I let it go to voicemail because I knew it wouldn't actually be my dad calling. Sure enough, when I listened to the message a few minutes later, it was my mother's voice screaming at me about humiliating the family. She said I had no right to air private business on social media where everyone could see it, that I was making them all look bad and turning people against them, that family issues should stay within the family and I'd betrayed them by telling strangers about our problems. The voicemail went on for 3 full minutes, her voice getting louder and more angry as she talked about loyalty and discretion and how I'd always been dramatic, but this crossed a line. She said I owed her and my father and Bethany an apology for what I'd done. I deleted the voicemail and blocked my dad's number along with my mom's and Bethy's. I was done listening to them yell at me. That weekend, Kyle's brother, Travis, showed up at our door with his wife carrying bags of groceries. Travis said they figured we could use some help with regular stuff while we were dealing with everything else. His wife started putting things away in our kitchen while Travis sat down with us in the living room. He told me he thought we'd done exactly the right thing by choosing ourselves and going to Hawaii instead of the wedding. That sometimes you have to put your own healing first, even when other people don't understand it. His wife came back from the kitchen and sat next to Travis, nodding along with what he was saying. Travis said he was proud of how we'd handled everything and that he knew it couldn't have been easy. Travis's wife mentioned that she'd had a miscarriage before their first successful pregnancy. She said her family had been really supportive during that time, bringing meals and checking on her and giving her space when she needed it. She said that support made all the difference in her being able to heal and eventually try again. Hearing her talk about a family that actually showed up the right way made something click in my head. I'd been so deep in my own situation that I'd started thinking maybe this was just how families handled these things. Maybe I was being too sensitive or expecting too much. But listening to Travis's wife describe her experience made me realize how wrong my family's response had been. Normal families don't throw parties next to someone who just lost a baby. Normal families don't tell you to get over it so you can focus on someone else's wedding. Normal families don't lie to everyone about what happened to make themselves look better. I started crying and Travis's wife gave me a hug. She said it was okay to be angry about how they treated me, that I had every right to feel betrayed and hurt. Kyle squeezed my hand and Travis said they were here for whatever we needed. They stayed for another hour just talking about regular stuff and helping us feel less alone. When they left, Travis reminded me that we had family in them, even if my blood relatives weren't acting like it. The next week, I made an appointment with a therapist named Octavia, who specialized in grief and family problems. I'd found her website online and read that she helped people process loss and deal with difficult family situations. When I showed up for my first session, I expected to spend most of the time talking about the miscarriage itself. But instead, I found myself spending almost the whole hour talking about my family's response to it, about the party and the voicemails and the wedding and everything that came after. Octavia listened without interrupting and took notes, nodding occasionally, but mostly just letting me talk. At the end of the session, Octavia said something that made me stop and think. She said I was grieving two separate losses, the baby I wanted and the family I thought I had. She explained that the second loss was actually making it harder to process the first one because I couldn't separate the two experiences in my mind. Every time I tried to grieve the baby, I'd end up thinking about how my family acted, and that would make me angry instead of sad. And every time I tried to deal with my family issues, I'd remember why it all started, and that would pull me back into the grief about the baby. The two losses were tangled together, and I needed to learn how to grieve them separately. Over the next few weeks, I kept seeing Octavia and working through everything. I started having dreams about the baby, dreams where I was still pregnant or where I was holding a baby that looked like Kyle. I'd wake up crying and Kyle would hold me while I worked through it. But now I had tools from therapy to help me process the grief instead of just drowning in it. Octavia taught me ways to sit with the sadness without letting it swallow me whole. Kyle and I started talking about whether we wanted to try getting pregnant again someday. Not making any decisions, but just being honest about our fears and hopes. My mother left another voicemail, this time saying that Bethany and Wyatt were back from their honeymoon. She said they wanted to come over and clear the air with me, that we all needed to sit down and talk through our issues like adults. I listened to the message and then deleted it without responding. I knew that any conversation right now would be on their terms, not mine. They'd want me to apologize and admit I was wrong and promise to do better. They'd want me to hear their side and understand their feelings without actually acknowledging mine. I wasn't ready for that and might never be. For now, I needed to focus on healing myself, not on making them feel better about how they'd treated me. 2 days later, Arabella stopped by my desk with a coffee and a question. She asked if I wanted to come to her book club on Thursday night. Said they met twice a month at a coffee shop downtown. I opened my mouth to say no because I hadn't done anything social since the miscarriage. Hadn't wanted to explain myself to strangers or pretend to be okay when I wasn't. But Arabella must have seen the hesitation on my face because she added that it was just a casual group, no pressure, and we mostly talked about books and drank too much caffeine. I told her I'd think about it and she left the invitation on my desk, a little card with the coffee shop address and meeting time written in purple ink. That evening, I showed Kyle the card and he picked it up, turned it over in his hands. He said I should go, that it might be good for me to spend time with people who didn't know about everything that happened. I argued that I didn't know how to talk to people anymore, that I just sit there awkwardly while everyone else had fun. Kyle reminded me that I used to love book clubs before we started trying to get pregnant, back when I had time for things besides fertility treatments and doctor appointments. He was right, but I still felt nervous about it, about being around new people and having to act normal when normal felt like something I'd forgotten how to do. Thursday came and I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside the coffee shop for 10 minutes, watching through the window as women arrived and greeted each other with hugs. They looked comfortable together, like they'd known each other forever, and I felt like an intruder about to crash their established group. But I told Arabella I was coming, and backing out now felt worse than going in, so I grabbed my purse and walked through the door before I could change my mind. The coffee shop smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. Arabella waved me over to a corner where 6 women sat around 2 tables pushed together. Paperback books and coffee cups scattered across the surface. She introduced me to everyone and their names blurred together except for one woman named Marina who taught 3rd grade and had the warmest smile I'd seen in months. They were discussing a mystery novel about a missing woman and a detective who refused to give up the case. And for the next 2 hours, I just listened and occasionally added my thoughts about the plot twists. Nobody asked me personal questions or wanted to know why I was there. I was just Laura who liked mystery novels and good coffee. Not Laura who had a miscarriage or Laura whose family threw a party while she grieved. The book club talked about the ending and whether the detective made the right choice, then moved on to what they were reading next and recommendations for good thrillers. Near the end of the meeting, Marina mentioned that her family still hadn't forgiven her for not having kids. She said she and her husband decided 10 years ago they didn't want children, that they liked their life the way it was, but her mother called her selfish at every family gathering. Another woman named Rachel jumped in and said she was estranged from her mother over boundary issues. That her mom kept showing up unannounced and making demands until Rachel finally had to cut contact completely. The conversation shifted to difficult families and everyone had a story, some worse than others, but all of them complicated in ways I understood. I sat there listening and realized I wasn't alone in having family problems that didn't fit the happy stories people usually told. When the meeting ended and everyone started packing up their books, Marina gave me her number and said I should text her if I ever wanted to grab coffee outside of book club. Arabella walked me to my car and asked if I'd come back next time, and I told her yes, without even thinking about it. I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in months. A lightness in my chest that made breathing easier. Kyle was watching TV when I walked in and he looked up, saw my face, and asked what happened. I sat down next to him and told him I thought I just made actual friends who liked me for me, not because we shared DNA or grew up in the same house. Friends who didn't know about the miscarriage or the wedding or any of it, who just knew me as Laura from book club who had opinions about mystery novels. The next day, I was eating lunch in my car, scrolling through my phone and trying to decide if I wanted to join the book club's group chat when someone knocked on my window. I looked up and saw Bethany standing there in a sundress and sandals, her face tight with anger. My stomach dropped and I considered just driving away, but she was already pulling on my door handle. I unlocked it because refusing felt worse somehow, like I was scared of her and I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Bethany climbed into my passenger seat without being invited and immediately started talking. She demanded to know why I was telling everyone she was a terrible person when she didn't do anything wrong. I stared at her and asked what she was talking about, and she pulled out her phone to show me Facebook comments from relatives saying they were disappointed in how she treated me. She said I must have been spreading lies about her, turning the family against her, making myself look like the victim when really I was just bitter and jealous. I told Bethany I'd never mentioned her name to anyone outside our immediate family. I said if people were drawing their own conclusions about her character, maybe she should think about why that was happening instead of blaming me. She called me a liar and her voice got louder. Said I'd always been jealous of her even when we were kids. She brought up the time I got better grades in middle school and she claimed I made her feel stupid. Then jumped to high school when I made the volleyball team and she said I was showing off. None of it had anything to do with the wedding or the miscarriage, but she kept going, listing every time she thought I'd wronged her over the past 20 years. The passenger door opened and Arabella was standing there, looking between me and Bethany with concern on her face. She asked if everything was okay, and positioned herself between us, one hand on the door frame. Bethany looked at Arabella and then back at me. Seemed to realize she was making a scene in my work parking lot where my coworkers could see. She climbed out of the car and pointed at me through the window. Yelled that this wasn't over and I couldn't hide from family forever. Then she got in her car and peeled out of the parking lot fast enough to leave tire marks on the pavement. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't hold my phone. Arabella asked if I wanted to sit in her car for a minute and I nodded because mine suddenly felt contaminated by Bethy's presence. We walked across the parking lot and she unlocked her doors. Let me sit in the passenger seat while she got in the driver's side. She didn't ask questions or push me to explain what just happened. She just sat there with me while my breathing slowed down and my hands stopped trembling. And after a few minutes, she told me she had my back whatever I needed. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at a blank email. Kyle made dinner and brought me a plate, but I couldn't eat yet. Needed to finish this first. I started typing an email to my parents, Bethany and Wyatt, laying out clear boundaries that should have been obvious, but apparently needed to be spelled out. No unannounced visits to my home or workplace. No third-party messages through other family members trying to guilt me into contact. No contact at all until I explicitly said I was ready to talk. I wrote it all out in simple language they couldn't misinterpret or twist around, then called Kyle over to read it. He read through it twice and added a line at the end, making it clear these boundaries applied to both of us, that he supported everything I was asking for and would enforce them himself if needed. We both signed it like a formal document, even though it was just an email. Then I moved my cursor to the send button. My finger hovered over the mouse, and I felt terrified and empowered at the same time, like I was about to jump off a cliff, but also finally taking control of when and how I landed. Octavia had told me that setting boundaries would feel uncomfortable because I'd spent my whole life prioritizing other people's feelings over my own needs. That the discomfort was actually a sign I was doing something healthy, even if it didn't feel that way. I clicked send before I could second-guess myself and watched the email disappear from my outbox. My inbox dinged almost right away, barely 10 minutes after Kyle and I sent the email. I opened it and saw my mother's name. Her response already typed and waiting, like she'd been sitting at her computer just hoping I'd give her something to react to. The email started with how Kyle was clearly controlling me and turning me against my own family. How I'd become someone she didn't even know anymore. She wrote that a real daughter would forgive instead of holding on to anger. That family meant letting things go and moving forward together. Every line made my chest tight because she still didn't get it. Still thought this was about me being stubborn instead of them being cruel when I needed them most. My dad's email came next, shorter than my mom's, but worse in its own way. He wrote about how I was breaking my mother's heart with my behavior. How I'd regret pushing them away when they were gone someday. The guilt trip was so obvious, I almost wanted to laugh, except it still hurt. Still made that small voice in my head whisper that maybe I was being too harsh. But then I remembered the music playing 20 feet from my window while I bled and cried. And the hurt turned back into anger that felt more solid than guilt. Bethy's response took longer to arrive, but when it did, the email was massive. She'd written out everything she thought I'd ever done wrong, starting from when we were kids, bringing up the time I got better grades in middle school, and made her feel stupid. According to her version of things, she listed the volleyball team in high school, where apparently I was just showing off, then jumped to college and jobs and boyfriends, creating this whole narrative where I'd spend our entire lives trying to make her feel bad about herself. The wedding and miscarriage barely got mentioned except as more proof of my supposed jealousy and bitterness. She ended by saying she was done trying to have a relationship with someone as toxic and selfish as me. And I sat there staring at the screen, thinking how she just proved exactly why I needed distance. I printed all 3 emails and brought them to my next appointment with Octavia. She read through each one carefully while I sat picking at my fingernails and trying not to cry. When she finished, she looked up at me and pointed out something I hadn't quite put together myself yet. None of them actually said sorry for what they did or even admitted they'd done anything wrong. Every single email was about how my boundaries made them feel, how I was hurting them by protecting myself. Octavia said that was typical of people who couldn't accept responsibility, turning everything around so they became the victims of my reaction instead of the cause of my pain. She suggested I write a letter I'd never send, putting down everything I wanted to say without worrying about their interruptions or twisted logic. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started typing. I wrote about the baby and the hospital and calling my mom while my world fell apart. I wrote about the music and balloons and Bethany showing up at my door with cake like that made anything better. I wrote about every casserole and voicemail and guilt trip, about the parking lot confrontation and the emails that proved they still didn't understand. Tears ran down my face the whole time, but I kept typing. And when I finally finished, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying all those words inside me, and they were finally out where I could see them. Kyle found me at the table an hour later, the letter saved on my computer, and my eyes red from crying. He read it over my shoulder. And then wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my head. We stayed like that for a while before he said, maybe we should think about moving away from the house next door to my parents. I'd been thinking the same thing, but hadn't wanted to say it out loud because I loved my grandmother's house. Loved that she'd left it to me and trusted me with the place she'd lived for 40 years. But Kyle was right that staying here was making everything harder, keeping us stuck in constant awareness of my family's presence just 20 feet away. The next weekend, we met with a real estate agent who showed us houses in neighborhoods about 20 minutes from where we live now. Close enough that our jobs and friends stayed the same. Far enough that my parents couldn't just walk over whenever they felt like it. We looked at 3 different places, and the last one felt right the moment we walked in. It had a small backyard with space for a garden, 3 bedrooms, even though we only needed 2, and a front porch with enough room for chairs where we could sit in the evenings. Looking at it felt different from just surviving each day. Felt like actually planning for something good instead of just trying to get through the bad. Kyle's brother came over for dinner that week and we told him about the house. He got excited right away. Said he and his wife would help us move whenever we were ready. Then he joked about personally making sure my parents never got our new address. And even though he was trying to be funny, it also felt good knowing Kyle's family actually cared about protecting us. They filled some of the empty space my own family had left. Showed me what support was supposed to look like when people actually loved you instead of just expecting you to fit their idea of family. My aunt called a few days later with an update I didn't ask for about drama at family gatherings. Apparently, some relatives were taking my side after seeing my Facebook post about the miscarriage, while others still believed my mother's version where I was just jealous and difficult. My aunt said cousins were arguing and my mom was upset that people were questioning her like somehow I'd caused problems by telling the truth. She told me she understood if I needed space from everyone, not just my immediate family, because things were messy and complicated now. I thanked her for calling, but told her I needed to focus on my own healing instead of getting pulled into family drama or being asked to fix conflicts I didn't create. She said she got it and promised to respect my boundaries. Wouldn't call with updates anymore unless I specifically asked. After we hung up, I felt relieved because even well-meaning family members could make things harder by keeping me connected to all the chaos I was trying to escape. The next book club meeting happened at the coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday night. We finished talking about the mystery novel we'd all read, and then Marina turned to me and asked if I'd ever tried yoga. I told her no, that I'd thought about it before but never actually went. She said she went to classes on Saturday mornings at a studio near the library and she thought I might like it because the instructor focused on connecting with your body instead of just the workout part. I hadn't exercised much since the miscarriage because my body felt like this separate thing that had betrayed me, something I couldn't trust anymore. But Marina made it sound gentle and safe. So, I told her I'd try it once and see how it went. She wrote down the address and class time on a napkin and said she'd meet me there on Saturday. That Saturday morning, I almost didn't go. Kyle had to practically push me out the door, telling me it was just 1 hour and I could leave anytime if I hated it. The studio was small and warm with wooden floors and big windows. Marina was already there waiting for me and she introduced me to the instructor who told us to grab mats and find a spot. The class started with breathing exercises that felt weird at first, but then we moved into poses and the instructor kept talking about honoring your body and listening to what it needs instead of forcing it to do things. About halfway through the class, something in my chest started feeling tight and I realized I was fighting back tears. By the time we got to the final relaxation pose where we just laid on our mats, I couldn't hold it in anymore and tears were running down my face into my hair. I tried to be quiet about it, but Marina was on the mat next to mine and definitely noticed. When class ended and everyone started rolling up their mats, Marina came over and gave me a hug without saying anything about the crying. Then she told me that yoga brings up emotions sometimes, that it's normal and actually kind of the point. We went to get coffee after and she didn't make it weird or ask a bunch of questions. Just sat with me while I pulled myself together. Kyle and I started looking at houses more seriously after that. We'd been talking about moving for weeks, but hadn't actually done anything about it. The real estate agent showed us 3 different places in one weekend, and the last one was a small ranch-style house with a fenced backyard. It had 3 bedrooms, even though we only needed 2, and there was space in the yard where we could plant a garden and grow vegetables if we wanted. Walking through it felt different from the other houses. Felt like somewhere we could actually see ourselves living instead of just surviving. Kyle kept looking at me to see what I thought and I kept nodding because I didn't trust myself to talk without crying again. We sat in the car afterward and I told him I wanted to make an offer on it. He called the agent right there and we went back to her office to do the paperwork. 3 days later, she called to say our offer got accepted and Kyle picked me up and spun me around in the kitchen. It felt like the first truly forward-moving decision we'd made since the miscarriage. Like we were actually planning for something good instead of just trying to get through each day. I told Octavia about the new house in our next therapy session. She asked how I felt about leaving my grandmother's house behind and I started to give her some answer about how hard it was because my grandmother left it to me. But then I stopped and really thought about it and I realized I wasn't actually leaving my grandmother behind at all. I was leaving the proximity to people who hurt me, and my grandmother would have supported that completely. She never let anyone treat her badly, never made excuses for people who didn't respect her boundaries. If she were still alive, she probably would have told my parents exactly what she thought of them after that shower, and she definitely would have understood why we needed distance. Octavia smiled when I said that and told me it sounded like I was honoring my grandmother by taking care of myself the way she would have wanted. My mother somehow found out we were moving. I don't know which family member told her or if she'd been driving by and saw the for sale sign, but she left a voicemail saying we were running away from our problems. She said distance won't change the fact that we're family, that you can't just move away from your blood relatives and pretend they don't exist. Her voice got higher and tighter as the message went on, and she ended it by saying she hoped we were happy making everyone miserable. Kyle was with me when I saw the voicemail notification, and he took my phone and deleted it before I could listen to the whole thing. He said I didn't need to hear whatever she had to say, that we already knew it would just be more guilt trips and manipulation. We started packing up the house the following week. I was going through boxes in the hall closet when I found the onesie my father left on our doorstep that said Grandpa's fishing buddy. It was still in the plastic bag he'd put it in, still had the tags on it. I sat down right there on the floor holding it and cried for the baby who would have worn it and for the grandfather I thought my dad would be. Kyle found me there 20 minutes later and sat down next to me without saying anything at first. Then he took the onesie from my hands and looked at it for a long time before suggesting we bury it in my grandmother's garden as a way of saying goodbye to both the baby and this chapter of our lives. We went outside that evening when it was starting to get dark and dug a small hole near the back fence where my grandmother used to grow roses. Kyle placed the onesie in the hole and we both said some words about the baby we'd lost and the life we'd imagined. Then we filled in the dirt and planted a rose bush over the spot. A small private ceremony just for the two of us. Arabella found out we were moving when I mentioned it at work, and she immediately started planning a party. She called it a new house party instead of a housewarming party because she said we needed practical gifts for starting over, not decorative stuff. The book club women all came and brought things like cleaning supplies and tools and a first aid kit. Marina gave us a set of dish towels she'd made herself, and another woman brought over a whole box of light bulbs and batteries because she said those are the things you never think about until you need them. Standing in my living room, surrounded by these women who'd become real friends in just a few months, made me realize I built something real with them, something that felt more like family than my actual family did. They asked about the new house and made plans to come visit once we got settled. And nobody mentioned my parents or the drama or anything about what had happened. They just focused on being happy for us and supporting this new start. Moving day arrived on a Saturday morning in early October. Travis showed up at 7 o'clock with a truck and 3 of his friends who all volunteered to help us load everything. We worked for hours carrying boxes and furniture. And the whole time I could see my parents watching from their window next door. They didn't come outside or offer to help or say anything. Just watched us pack up our lives and prepare to leave. Part of me expected my mother to come running out at the last minute to make some dramatic scene, but she never did. When Kyle loaded the last box into the truck, I looked back at their house one more time and felt relief instead of guilt. Travis noticed me looking and put his hand on my shoulder. Told me we were doing the right thing. Then he climbed in the truck and led the way to our new house 20 minutes across town. In our new house, Kyle and I walked through each room talking about what we wanted it to be. The guest room would be for Travis's family to visit with a comfortable bed and space for their kids to play. The office would be where we'd both work from home sometimes with 2 desks facing the window that looked out at the backyard. The kitchen would be where we'd host book club meetings and family dinners with people who actually cared about us. The master bedroom would be our safe space, somewhere we could close the door and shut out the rest of the world when we needed to. Standing in that empty house talking about the future felt like breathing properly for the first time in months, like we'd finally found a place where we could actually heal instead of just existing in survival mode. The next week, I set up my laptop in our home office for my first therapy session in the new house. Octavia's face appeared on the screen, and before I could even say hello, she smiled and told me I looked different. She said I seemed lighter somehow, more present in my own body, and asked if I'd noticed the change, too. I told her I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in months, like the weight pressing down on my chest had gotten lighter since we moved. She asked if I was ready to start separating my grief about the miscarriage from everything that happened with my family afterward. I said yes, and meant it. Over the next several weeks, we worked through all the feelings I'd pushed aside while dealing with my family's actions. I talked about the names Kyle and I had picked out, how we'd argued over whether to find out the gender or wait, the way I'd imagined teaching our kid to ride a bike in my grandmother's driveway. Octavia helped me see that I'd been grieving two losses at once and letting my family's behavior overshadow the actual baby I'd lost. She gave me permission to be sad about the pregnancy without connecting it to everything else. And that separation felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. I cried through most of those sessions, but it felt different from before, cleaner somehow, like I was actually processing the loss instead of just drowning in it. Kyle and I started talking about trying again one night while we were unpacking boxes in the kitchen. He asked how I'd feel about getting pregnant again someday, and I said I wanted to try, but things would be different this time. We agreed we wouldn't tell anyone until much later. Maybe not until the second trimester or even after the baby was born. This pregnancy, if it happened, would be ours to protect and experience privately without outside pressure or expectations. No Sunday dinner announcements, no early excitement from people who might not actually support us, just Kyle and me and whatever happened next. He held my hand across the kitchen counter and promised we'd do it our way this time. 3 months after moving, I found a letter in our mailbox that had been forwarded from our old address. The return address had Bethy's name on it, and my first instinct was to throw it away without opening it. Kyle came home from work and found me standing in the kitchen staring at the envelope. He suggested I read it with him there for support. So, we sat down at the table together, and I opened it. Bethy's handwriting covered 2 pages, and I had to read it twice to believe what I was seeing. She wrote that she'd been thinking about everything that happened and realized the timing of her shower was hurtful. She said she'd been so focused on her wedding that she didn't stop to think about what I was going through or how hard it must have been to hear the party from my bedroom. She stopped short of actually apologizing and used phrases like, "I could have been more considerate," instead of admitting she was wrong, but it was still more acknowledgement than I'd gotten from anyone in my family. She ended by saying she hoped we could talk someday when I was ready. I put the letter down and Kyle asked what I wanted to do about it. I said I didn't know yet, that I needed to process it with Octavia before deciding anything. In my next therapy session, we spent the whole hour talking about whether I wanted any relationship with Bethany and what that would look like if I did. Octavia asked what boundaries would need to exist for me to feel safe having contact with my sister. I realized I wasn't ready yet and might never be. And Octavia told me that was completely okay. She said I didn't owe Bethany a response or a relationship just because we shared DNA, that I got to decide what was best for my own healing. I filed the letter away in a drawer and didn't respond. 2 weeks before Christmas, I found a card in our mailbox addressed to both Kyle and me. My mother's handwriting stared back at me from the envelope, and I felt my stomach drop because someone had given her our new address, despite our requests for privacy. Inside was a generic Christmas card with a photo of Bethany and Wyatt in matching sweaters, smiling at the camera like nothing had ever happened. My mother's message said, "Wishing you peace, enjoy this holiday season," with both my parents' signatures at the bottom. No acknowledgement of the miscarriage, no mention of the months of silence, no recognition that anything had gone wrong between us, just a normal Christmas card like we were a normal family. I showed it to Kyle and waited to feel angry or hurt or betrayed. Instead, I just felt tired. I filed the card away with Bethy's letter and turned my attention to the holiday we were actually planning. Kyle and I were hosting Christmas dinner at our new house for the first time, inviting Travis and his family along with Arabella and a few people from book club. I spent the next week planning the menu and decorating the house, focusing on creating something positive instead of dwelling on my mother's boundary violation. Marina offered to bring dessert, and Arabella volunteered to help me cook, and I realized I was genuinely excited about Christmas for the first time in years. Christmas Eve arrived, and I woke up feeling slightly sick to my stomach. I'd been tired for the past few days and blamed it on all the cooking and cleaning. But something made me dig through the bathroom cabinet for an old pregnancy test I'd bought months ago. I sat on the bathroom floor waiting for the result, not expecting anything when 2 pink lines appeared in the little window. Kyle was still asleep in bed and I walked back to the bedroom holding the test and shaking hands. I woke him up and showed him the positive test and we both just held each other and cried. We were terrified and hopeful at the same time, scared of losing another baby, but wanting so badly to believe this one would be okay. Kyle said this was our secret to protect and cherish, and I agreed. Nobody else needed to know until we were ready to tell them, if we ever were. I kept my therapy appointments throughout those early weeks. Even though I wanted to hide under the covers and protect this pregnancy from everything outside our house, Octavia helped me work through the fear that came with every twinge and cramp. Every moment I checked for bleeding. Every morning I woke up wondering if the baby was still there. She taught me techniques for staying present instead of jumping ahead to worst-case scenarios. Reminded me that this pregnancy was different from the last one, even though I couldn't know the outcome yet. I told her about the anxiety that woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. How I'd lie there with my hand on my stomach trying to feel something, anything that would tell me everything was okay. She said fear was normal after loss, but I didn't have to let it control every moment of this experience. I kept my appointments with Octavia every week through the first 3 months, sitting in her office and talking through every worry that popped into my head. She helped me see that my fear of losing this baby made sense after what happened before, but that I couldn't let that fear steal the joy from every moment. At 12 weeks, Kyle and I went in for another ultrasound and saw the baby moving around on the screen, heart beating strong and steady. The doctor said everything looked perfect and gave us pictures to take home. That night, Kyle suggested we tell Travis and his wife because they'd been so supportive through everything with my family. I agreed, wanting to share this news with people who actually knew how to be happy for us without making it about themselves. We drove over to Travis's house the next evening, and I felt nervous walking up to their door, scared that saying the words out loud would somehow jinx things. But when we sat down in their living room and told them I was pregnant again, Travis's wife started crying happy tears and gave me the longest hug. Travis shook Kyle's hand and said he was so glad we were getting this chance that he'd been hoping for good news for us. They asked how I was feeling and what the doctor said and promised to be there for whatever we needed. Sitting there with them, I felt grateful to have family who knew how to show up with actual love instead of drama. The following week at book club, I decided to tell those friends, too, because they'd become important to me over the past months. We were sitting around Marina's living room talking about the current book when I found a natural pause in the conversation and said I had some news to share. When I told them about the pregnancy, they all cheered and hugged me. But Marina also asked gently how I was feeling given what happened before. I appreciated that she acknowledged my previous loss instead of pretending it didn't exist. Marina then shared that she'd had 2 miscarriages before she and her husband decided to be child-free, and hearing her talk so openly about it made me feel less alone in my complicated feelings. Another woman mentioned her sister had lost a baby and how hard that was. And suddenly, we were having a real conversation about grief and hope existing together. I left book club that night feeling like I'd found people who understood that being happy about this pregnancy didn't erase the sadness about the baby I lost. That Saturday morning, Kyle and I sat at our kitchen table drinking coffee and talking about whether we should tell my family about the pregnancy. I'd been thinking about it for days, weighing the options in my head during quiet moments. Kyle said it was completely my choice, but that he wanted to protect this experience from becoming about their feelings or drama. I thought about my mother's response to the miscarriage, how she'd made it about Bethy's shower instead of my grief. I remembered Bethany showing up at my door during the worst moment of my life to lecture me about negativity. The more I thought about it, the clearer my answer became. I told Kyle that if we decided to tell them at all, it wouldn't be until after the baby was born. This pregnancy was ours to protect and cherish, something sacred that I refused to let anyone make about themselves. Kyle reached across the table and squeezed my hand, saying he agreed completely, and that we'd figure out the rest as we went. At 20 weeks, we went in for the anatomy scan where they check all the baby's organs and measurements. The tech moved the wand around my belly for what felt like forever, taking pictures and typing notes. Then, she asked if we wanted to know the gender, and both Kyle and I said yes, at the same time. She turned the screen toward us and pointed, saying we were having a girl. I started crying immediately thinking about the daughter I'd get to raise and all the things I wanted to teach her. Kyle held my hand and leaned over to kiss my forehead while I cried happy tears. The tech left us alone for a minute and Kyle whispered that our daughter was lucky to have me as her mom. I looked at him and felt something shift inside me. Like maybe I could actually believe that this little girl would grow up knowing her worth, learning to set boundaries, understanding that she didn't have to accept bad treatment from anyone just because they were family. I put my hand on my belly and made a silent promise to her that I'd be the mother I needed.